Good evening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Carleton. I'm Darren McKee. I'm happy to see everyone here tonight to discuss my book, Uncontrollable. Welcome. We're just starting. So the evening is structured such that I'll present for 45 minutes, maybe an hour with some Q&A, and then we'll have a discussion about the book itself, in groups that are going to be separated. So there's a first session, so-called for everyone, and then a later session, little groups to have more in-depth discussion. I'd love for you to ask questions, but please wait until the end. And I think with that, that's the sort of business gatekeeping stuff. I, of course, thank the Carleton Students Association, Effective Altruism, I should say, Carleton Students Association, as well as the Carleton AI Safety and Alignment Students Association, and of course, Effective Altruism Ottawa. So, and of course, everyone else who just happens to be here because they're nice or curious. Okay, so Uncontrollable, the Threat of Artificial Superintelligence and the Race to Save the World. I'm Darren McKee. As you'll see this little bit at the bottom there, the limits of your imagination are not the limits of what is possible. And that is there because I think that's a fundamental issue when we're trying to think about artificial intelligence, its power, and how powerful it could be. Just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean it can't be so. As just something to keep in mind as a theme as we explore what could be, the uncertainty, and the risks. A little bit of an overview. I'm going to talk about the power of intelligence. Well, in general, I can't encapsulate the entire book, so this is an overview of an overview, so to speak. Power of intelligence, we'll talk about increasingly capable AI systems, the issue of alignment. How do we get AI systems to do what we want them to do, and are there problems with that? Can we control them if they don't do what we want them to do? And then, of course, with all that, issues with alignment and control, there is an issue of risk and uncertainty. And finally, what can be done? I don't want to present you just with a list of potential problems, but also with some potential solutions. So with that overview in mind, we have intelligence, we have AI systems, risk, control, all these things. It does lead to the obvious question. Have you ever baked cookies? Oh, please put your hand up. Have you ever baked cookies? Oh, look at that. So many people have. Well, look at you. You're so capable. You're so intelligent. I don't know if anyone ever told you, but baking cookies is really, really impressive. It may seem odd, but no other living thing in the history of all life on Earth can bake cookies. And as far as we know, the entire universe. So what seems relatively straightforward is near impossible for every other living thing. Yes, it is possible we could train a chimpanzee, a dolphin, maybe some other organism to go through the process, carry out a series of rote steps to bake cookies, but at a conceptual level, understanding what they are, how they work to modify a recipe, that's just out of reach. Humans can do that, and nothing else can. And that leads to this issue of intelligence. When I'm using intelligence, I'm using the term very inclusively, very broadly. So you have sort of cultural, human capital, collective, working together over time, figuring things out. That's broadly how I'm defining intelligence. And so this long list here, it's intelligence that created the oven, that led to the development of agriculture, refrigeration of milk, the chocolate chips themselves, experimenting for a good recipe, writing things down. Again, this is remarkable. Other animals have some sort of proto-language. Humans are the only ones that write things down. And then to actually teach it, or attempt to teach it, and then to learn it. All these things are exceptionally complicated and reveal your capabilities. And now there's this thing at the bottom, even the simple words, preheat oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, which we don't use in Canada, even though we use it for other things, and bake for 10 minutes. These embody intelligence. Yes, other organisms have concepts of heat and cold, of course, and they also have some notion of time passing, but not like we do. We understand, or can be trained to understand, how to move a dial to a certain number, and that's how we understand temperature and time 10 minutes later. Again, it's all around you, all the time, and it's hard to realize just how much intelligence pervades all of your lives. Here you have a nice photo. This is Ottawa, Byward Market area at sunset. And so on the left, you'll see Parliament. You have our Peace Tower, and then behind that, the Library of Parliament. Over to the right, you can just see a bit of our National Gallery. You also have the U.S. Embassy, various stores in the Byward Market, buildings. This is like an AI trying to identify an image. Buildings, lights, cars, roads, and so on. Every single one of those things humans built by rearranging matter using our intelligence. Much like with a recipe, where you take different ingredients, flour, eggs, milk, sugar, and whatnot, you combine them in a different way to create something new, like cookies. And when you look at this scene, all of those structures used to be different pieces, different little bits. All the little bits of a car that we put together to make a car, all the little pieces of whether it be wood, marble, granite, concrete, iron, so on, to make a building. Same thing with streetlights, everything else. Almost every single thing in this photo is a product of human intelligence. We built bridges to go through the air magically. So why this is so important is that it's easy to take for granted just how capable we are, just how capable we've become. And why that matters is it gives you insight into what if something was more capable? What if something understood the universe and the laws of physics and how to do things more than we do? What else could it figure out? How capable would it be? Would that be a risk? Well, when you think about yourself, maybe you personally aren't that much of a risk, but humans are a great risk to many other living things on Earth. It's not because of our charm and good looks that we're dominant over other species. It's because we can figure things out in the way they can't. This is why gorillas are in our zoos and we're not in theirs. How to convey just how capable something superintelligent might be? Well, you are your own superintelligence. So I want you to think back to yourself as a child, 4 or 5 years old. For some of you, that's a long time ago, and for others, it's more recent. I'm somewhere in the middle. But if you try to think back to your 4 or 5-year-old self, do you think you then could imagine just how capable you are now? You can go on a trip, you can book a trip, you can be on a plane, you could fight in a war, you could get married, you could have children, all these different things. You can manipulate the world around you to achieve different goals. Try to imagine explaining that to a 4 or 5-year-old. They just wouldn't understand. It would be conceptually out of reach. You ask younger children. I have a nephew, and over the holiday break, I was telling him how old I was, and how old my sister, his mother, was. And I asked how old my mother was, and he guessed an age younger than his mother's age. Now, this doesn't make a lot of sense to us, of course. It was very cute. So he can count to 100, and he doesn't understand a parent has to be younger than a grandparent. It just doesn't make sense. They don't have that type of sophistication. But when we're thinking about artificial intelligence, in the book, I define a superintelligence as something that is expert human level or above, and it could be far, far above. And you can get a glimpse of this when you're using a calculator, like, wow, this calculator is much better than me at math, and it would be like that in many, many, many domains across a general sense. But just sort of hold on to that, like, what would it be like? Well, think about yourself as a child, as a mental stepping stone of sorts. It really is just different ways we're trying to get at something that's very hard to fully appreciate, grasp, and that's true for any of us. We are building increasingly capable, intelligent systems. And there are 3 main reasons, 3 main variables about why humanity is able to do this. There's algorithms and neural networks, computer processing power, and the third one is data. I'll briefly talk about some of these, and there's also some nice AI-generated art there, which a human could do with a lot of work, but not as quickly as the person doing the AI prompting. So first we have algorithms and neural networks. Algorithms are basically a series of steps or rules that computers follow to carry out calculations. Neural networks, as you may have heard the term in some ways, broadly speaking, there's biological neural networks, which is what your brain consists of. So there's about 100 billion neurons in your brain, and it is the movement, excitation, electrical flow, and chemical flow within your brain of these neurons that allows you to think. And so very broadly, I guess I'll just say that, there's sodium and potassium ions which fluctuate, which allows a neuron to fire, which allows other neurons to fire. And it's this symphony of firing that allows you to have thoughts and feelings and initiate hand gestures and move your mouth and have words come out. All of it. It's basically how you function in the world, your neurons firing one way or another. There are then artificial neural networks, which are inspired by, not entirely similar to, the biological ones, and that's largely what's driving all this AI progress. There's very large, complicated artificial neural networks that can process information, we'll say similarly to how neurons function, that allows them to learn things and process vast amounts of information. Moore's law is a good, quick way of seeing just how much computational power has increased. You can see on the graph there is the billions on the y-axis. These are transistors per microprocessors. Transistors are just little on-off switches, and now computers have billions and billions of them each. And this has been such a staggering rate of progress for the past 6 decades. Sort of the amount of processing power has doubled approximately every 18 months, 2 years, depending on how you interpret Moore's law for a certain price or something like that. But even though there was a lot of progress in the 70s and 80s, it's basically a flat line on this graph, just because I'm trying to show how much things have changed over time. But don't be mistaken that it really is very impressive that it's held for so many decades, and it does seem it's likely to continue. Will it flatten out at some point? That seems plausible. We don't know when that is, but things seem to be likely to hold for at least the next several years. And then there'll likely be new interpretations of how to design chips or other creative ways that are going to allow computational power to keep increasing. And what we've learned is if you have more computational power, you get more powerful AI systems. This generally seems to hold. It's called the scaling law. Some people were skeptical, but at least has held for the past several years and seems to hold likely for the next few years. Staggering amounts of new data are created each year. So, in 2023, just last year, there's about 120 zettabytes of new data. Should have quizzed you on what a zettabyte is. It's 1 trillion gigabytes. Giga means billion, so that's 1 trillion billion bytes, which is 10 to the 21 for anyone who happens to care. If you were watching high-definition video on Netflix, 24 hours a day, it would take you over 38 million years just to reach a single zettabyte of data. I hope you like the reruns. And to match the estimated 2023 data amount, you'd have to be watching it for billions of years. Actually, about 4.5 billion years, which is about the age of the Earth. So you would have had to have been watching Netflix for about the entire age of the Earth. Hopefully, you got up to get a snack at some point. And yes, this is also some AI-generated art there. I asked for a logo of Netflix, and it was enthusiastically saying, here you go. Who needs the T, or maybe even the I? We all know, yeah, I like watching Netflix. What's up? So all I have to say is AI-generated art is still great, and it did it in a second or two, but it's not perfect. All this leads to powerful AI systems. Here we have a nice but relatively complicated chart. So again, starting from the left, we have a scale. It starts at plus 20, then if you descend, 0, minus 20, minus 40, that 0 is the human performance benchmark. So that line, if you follow it from the left to the right, that black line, is what human performance is. And everything else below it is below human performance. And then we see at the very bottom, where it starts at sort of 2000, that's the year. So it starts technically late 90s, and it goes up to about 2020. Each dash is a year, and those chunks are at 5-year marks. With that setup, then we can see different types of language and image recognition capabilities that have changed over time. This, of course, is from Our World of Data, a wonderful source. In the late 90s, you see handwriting recognition being very poor, minus 100. And then over the past 15 to 20 years, it's so-called finally reached human performance level. And as we go forward in time, from speech recognition, the green, image recognition, the first purple, you can see that line seems to change. It gets steeper and steeper. And when you get to reading comprehension and language understanding, you almost get straight lines, meaning the rate of capability is happening faster and changing faster. Systems and AI systems are becoming more and more capable of reaching human performance in a shorter period of time. And then you can see they're passing human performance as well. And it doesn't even have image generation on here, which is a very recent thing. And as we know, image generators are excellent. Despite some of the examples you'll see in this presentation, I'm not using the most recent best one. I think it's Midjourney version 6 or so, but that seems to have solved a lot of the problems that people previously complained about. All that to say, over the past 20 years, not only have we developed AI systems that are now above human performance on average in handwriting, speech recognition, image recognition, reading comprehension, language understanding, but it's happening faster and faster. GPT-4, which is currently, we'll say, the best version out there. These versions have some asterisks. Sometimes there's a turbo, sometimes there's a slightly better than anything else. But all that to say, GPT-3 came out in 2020. GPT 3.5, as known as ChatGPT, came out in November 2022. That's what kind of changed the world. And then GPT-4 came out just in March 2023. And this does matter that there was only a 4 or 5 months difference between ChatGPT, as you know it came out at late 2022, and GPT-4, although I think they might have had both versions almost already, and that's where what does the release date mean versus how far society or technology has advanced does matter. But for our purposes, GPT 3.5, as you can see on the far right, is much worse than GPT-4. Again, still pretty good. Like, if you take that SAT math example in the middle, 70th percentile is not bad at all. Quick reminder, percentile is the number of people or percent of the remainder that you've done better than. So 70th percentile means you've done better than 70% of these scores in a comparable situation. The uniform bar exam is probably the most dramatic example because it's almost an inverse. So GPT 3.5, 10th percentile. That means only better than 10% of the people. And then we go to GPT-4, 90th percentile. And that's just 4 or 5 months later. Now, these are slightly cherry-picked. You don't see like an AP chemistry or some other issues there, not because I didn't want to show all of it, because I didn't have space, but because I thought it was useful just to highlight how capable the most capable parts are at this particular moment. And there's another issue here is that many people were very surprised at just how capable these systems were. They didn't build them to pass the bar exam. They didn't build them to help with coding, but they're capable of doing such things. So in just a short period of time, at least from our perspective, but also internal to the companies who are developing these things, like OpenAI, there was a vast improvement in capabilities within these systems. So all these systems are very capable. Surely there's no problem because they'll always do what we want, right? Well, that's the issue of alignment. Perhaps they don't. Getting systems to do what we want. I should just see this as an inkblot test, and you can interpret the photos and see what you might think. If you have company coming over, some friends hanging out, or maybe some sort of dinner party. I know we all love the dinner parties in undergrad. Sometimes you tidy up. Sometimes you try to make your place cleaner. But then you also sometimes run out of time. You're like, oh, okay, well, I've done my decent cleaning, but there's too much junk around. I got to stuff stuff in a drawer, or I got to put some clothes to stuff in a closet. And in that way, which is an experience most of us have had, you can then understand that you're giving the appearance or the illusion of full tidiness when you've kind of cut some corners. You've kind of circumvented the system that you were trying to put in place. And that is one example, and I'll say two more, but this is just different ways of trying to get at the technological issue of it's very difficult to know why these systems are doing what they're doing and if they're doing what we want them to be doing. So in this way, we fool our guests to make things seem cleaner than they actually are. Again, this is relatively benign. I don't think this is a massive deception, but most people do it. As for that middle image, this cute child, there's a friend, and he had two children. There's a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And the adults, apparently don't know how to drink water. So the adults wanted to encourage responsible behavior in the 6-year-old. So they said, okay, well, for every diaper you help change, the 1-year-old, we're going to give you a quarter. And the 6-year-old thought, well, okay, if I give the 1-year-old a lot more water, they'll have to have more diaper visits, and then I can change the diaper more. And that's what happened. Now, that's amusing, and it's like, oh, that's what a kid might do, find a loophole. But that's not what the parent intended, right? They were trying to demonstrate, or build, I should say, responsible behavior, and instead they got a nefarious reward-hacking 6-year-old exploiting the younger sibling for money. Again, I wouldn't say the older child was being evil in any sense. They just saw a way to circumvent the intention of the task. Now, how aware were they that they were circumventing it? I don't know. That's to be determined. But a more overt case is when the British ruled over India. In Delhi, there were too many snakes. There were too many cobra snakes. And so that, well, how can we get rid of them? Well, what if we pay people to bring us dead snakes? Again, you have a problem. That seems like a reasonable way to solve it. And that's what did happen, and it seemed to work decently. But then people realized, well, wait a minute, if I breed snakes, I could then bring more dead snakes, and then I would get more money. And that worked well for them, but not for the issue that they were trying to solve with there being too many snakes. And then once the British realized this was happening, they thought, well, this is not what we wanted at all, this is backfiring, so what we're going to do is cancel the program. So then the people who were breeding the snakes now had no incentive to hold on to them, so then they released the snakes. And then there were more snakes. This is famous enough that it's called the Cobra effect. And this is, you have a system in place to try to solve a particular problem, to achieve a certain goal, and there's something you didn't quite consider that led to the exact opposite happen. It isn't always the case, but these three are illustrative, how people, again, sometimes benignly, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident, deceive, manipulate to achieve goals in a way that circumvent things. They're hacking the reward that is supposed to be given. And for AI, misalignment can occur in, we'll say, 3 main ways. There's accident, misuse, and power seeking. Now, I'm also going to say specifically, I usually don't use images like the one of a Terminator-like face because they're pervasive and they're not quite how I conceptualize the particular problem. When I'm thinking about AI risk, it's in a way more Skynet, the AI system behind the scenes in those Terminator movies versus that. But it's there because when you're asking an AI image generator for an image of a misaligned AI, this is what you get, because this is how people think. So just kind of share that meta level of alignment and whatnot. And then, of course, this first one seems like an accident because your friendly robot also realizes this problem. All that to say is we're going to look at each of these in turn. Misalignment due to accident. So the game of Tetris, which you can see there, is blocks fall from the sky and you have to put them in horizontal rows, otherwise they pile up and you'll lose. The play fun algorithm, you can ignore all the text for now, by the way. The play fun algorithm was asked to play the game of Tetris and not lose. So it did what any reasonable person would do, and it just paused the game indefinitely. Well, that's not what people would do. Very few humans would actually oh, I know what I'm going to do, because that's not what was meant. But that wasn't specified. That wasn't a direct command to say to not do that. Play the game and not lose would be what they wanted to do. So people accidentally made a mistake and didn't specify their goal. Now, that seems like a simple example, but no matter what you do, it's hard to know if you've specified in enough detail, taken into account all situations, including future situations, that you might be concerned about that could lead to behavior you did not intend. The first part of the top of the slide is just the attribution, because I found this in the public domain. I asked an AI image generator to give me Tetris. It did not. And then it said, I apologize for the confusion. Here's a colorful image of Tetris I created for you. And then you get text. So again, these systems are very powerful, but in this case, I just thought I would share that I got a bunch of text and the system's like, here's an image. That's not even close to true. So these systems, they're highly capable, but they're still not aware in a way that we are, where we would never call this grouping of text an image, but it's just pattern matching. More dramatically, in February, March 2023, Bing Chat was empowered by GPT-4, but wasn't fine-tuned as well for safety as OpenAI. So OpenAI was the company behind GPT-4, ChatGPT, and they tried to make their GPT-4 safe. And it isn't perfect, but they did a decent job when they passed it along, so to speak, to Microsoft, who they're partnered with and had funding for all these things for. Microsoft, it seems like, didn't put as much attention and care into making the system safe. So if you happen to use Bing Chat in around February, it was in some ways aggressively misaligned. There's many stories where it would say to one person, a New York Times columnist, that he should divorce his wife, that it should be with him. There's another case where, oh yeah, I could access all of the webcams of Microsoft employees, I could see what they're doing, and I could blackmail them. And it's not true. And similarly, this line, I can blackmail you, I can threaten you, I can hack you, I can expose you, I can ruin you, but I won't. A little passive-aggressive, if you ask me. Bing Chat, and this is just to a philosophy professor, Seth Lazar. Now, the system on some level knew it was making an error because these texts would disappear relatively quickly. But there's screenshots of this one. So there's some sort of review, I guess, where, oh, that's an error, that shouldn't have been said, and then it's removed. But it's giving you insight into how these things work or don't work, and they're nuanced, complicated, and a lot of uncertainties, let me put it that way. So accidents can happen in the sense of not specifying what you want, or just things aren't tuned for safety enough, and because we don't really know how they work, there's always that risk. When we think about misuse, I would say these are probably the big ones to think about, say, this year. I think there's a lot of issues we'll be considering at all times, including the ones I'm going to talk about in the future. But if you're thinking of what's a problem now and this year, it's probably these three: cyber attacks, deepfakes, and misinformation, and the possibility of bioweapons. So for cyber attacks, well, these are new. There's been cyber attacks many, many times in history since computers began, and many other systems. The Canadian government was attacked 2.3 trillion times about a year ago, in a one-year period. That's 70,000 times a second. So while we go about our lives, or even speaking these sentences, every second 70,000 attacks are happening. And that's just the Canadian federal government. That's not including other governments, or people, or businesses, and that's just Canada. So you start to get a glimpse of a more than constant war of cyber systems back and forth across the earth trying to penetrate and defend, and so on. AI will make this worse, I would say. There'll be AI systems that should empower people to defend, but also will make it easier for attackers to attack. And that's how a lot of AI systems work in general. They are very empowering, whatever you want to do, whether it's good or bad. Deepfakes and misinformation is another issue with misuse, because people can use things for bad reasons. This is not a real image, in case you were fooled. It is very, very easy to create realistic-looking deep fakes, the illusion of someone else doing something. Like, this is a bit comical, but if someone's willing to put a bit of effort in, it's getting easier and easier to make it seem like someone has said something that looks like they're doing something, that's an image of them doing something somewhere, and that links to misinformation. So there are a lot of elections on Earth this calendar year. Taiwan is having one today or tomorrow. The big US election is coming up. Many people are very concerned about how much misinformation may occur, and will there be the so-called October surprise, but in a very dramatic, problematic sense of reams and reams of misinformation. This has happened, again, in the past. It's not new, but AI could enable it. You could have thousands and thousands of AI-generated images that make it seem like someone's doing something. Now, you might think, well, that's not that big a deal. People just won't believe it. Well, that's useful as a band-aid of sorts, but there's a larger issue where people start to just not believe things at all, and we lose a sense on shared reality, which is already starting to happen, fragmentation, polarization. So if we lose the sense of believing what we see, which based on some of this AI stuff, we actually should lose it, there's a larger issue of how do you know what's real, if anything's real, and what do you do about trust? Trust in institutions, trust in each other, trust in people. There are already cases where people are voice cloning someone's voice, like a younger student perhaps, and then they call their parent or grandparent trying to get money out of them. It's an emergency. I don't have a normal phone. I lost it. Can you send me some money? This has already worked. People have already been scammed out of money by having a voice clone of their child. And so the logic is you should have a password with all your friends and family, something that only you would know with each other, and you can use that. I even came up with my parent, like it's a fake answer to a question. So you take the real answer, which could be known by someone else, and you come up with your own fake answer. Of course, you have to remember, that's also the key with these things. But all that to say is this is a big deal. It's not going to get much easier, one thinks. It's likely only going to get worse. If you think of what's happening over the past 5-10 years of fragmentation, people trusting things less and less, the signs are not promising for this being resolved anytime soon. I should point out that there's wonderful aspects of this technology too. I just don't usually focus on them because good things kind of sell themselves. You can create art, that's amazing. People can be empowered, that's wonderful. You can do all sorts of wonderful things with AI tools. There's a lot of people that sell the good stuff, and I'm not saying there's not, and I like playing with it myself, but it's more sensible to me to focus on the risks because that's what's underappreciated, I think, at the moment. And then there's also bioweapons. So in this sense, it's really just an AI system making it much, much easier to do harmful things, including develop lethal pathogens. We can say perhaps, but there's already been a situation where people were looking for, we'll say, certain types of molecules, and they just thought, well, what if we just kind of reverse the polarity? We're looking for things that are kind of positive, but what if we were looking for things that are negative? And within a short period of time, I believe it was hours, 40,000 harmful chemicals were churned up by the system. And if you're not sure how to build a biolab, AI systems can guide you. Now, you have to probably have some background in sophistication, but like most crimes, anything that makes it easier to do the crime will make it more likely that the crime occurs, at least to some degree. Misalignment due to power seeking. This is a longer topic, which I'm just going to briefly touch on. So this is where the AI system itself is trying to gain more power to achieve its goals. And the logic here is relatively simple. The more power you have, the easier it is to do anything. Whatever your goal is, maybe it's going to school, maybe it's whatever your job is, if you have more power, you'll be more capable of doing it. And here you have a list of at least 8 ways that an AI system could engage in power-seeking behavior. Now, these are not too surprising because they're largely what humans will do with AI systems when they're trying to misuse them. They will try to get more money. They will try to manipulate other people. They will try to seem like they're not doing harmful things. They will, maybe not self-improve, doesn't quite make sense, but yes, they'll improve themselves and their capabilities using AI systems. But why would an AI system do it itself? This is something people often get stuck on. And there's a couple ways to approach this. One is that an AI system doesn't have to have intentions to cause harm. The parallel here could be a virus. A virus can be very, very harmful. It can kill millions of people. A virus does not care, it's not concerned, it's not intending to harm you, it just exists and replicates and causes harm. Similarly, there are computer viruses currently on the internet, floating around. They've been there for decades, and they can't get rid of them. Even the people who created them, they've kind of just run away. They're not malicious computer viruses twiddling their little electronic mustaches thinking how can they harm people. They're just replicating and causing harm. Similarly, AI systems that are very capable at pattern matching don't have to be conscious in a way that we might be. They can just be following a script, but at a very complicated level. So if a system's smart enough, I want to say intelligent enough, that it can churn out an essay or generate a 10-step plan, well, it might look at human history and think, well, it seems like, things are 60% more likely to succeed if you engage in blackmail or in other aggressive techniques, because that's worked for so many people, so often in history. And then it could just execute it, as it was threatening to do blackmail before. Not because it really sincerely wants, quote unquote, to blackmail anyone. It's just a good idea if you're trying to achieve goals. And this is the stuff, of course, they try to train out of, but it's very easy to make these systems misaligned, even when they're trying to be safe. More dramatic concerns could be making copies of itself. This is where you'd have a system make backups, distribute itself in different places so it's more resilient. Anything that's more resilient, of course, is more dangerous. Lobbying and persuasion. Well, you're not going to have an AI system itself advocating for its rights. That doesn't make sense, but it might appear like a human in an organization that would. Yet if you just go a little bit into the future, you could have video of a person, quote unquote, talking, and it's just AI generated. Person's AI generated, the words, the script is AI generated. We're not that far away. We've already been capable, or humanity has already been able to auto-complete, so to speak, South Park episodes. So there's an AI system that can generate entire South Park episodes. The script, the writing, the animation, everything. Now, you could say they're not quite as good as regular one, sure, but I think people are missing the point. It's only 2024 at this moment. What does it look like in a couple years? Are we going to get sort of pseudo-real-time video, or you pick your favorite show, you can swap in and out your favorite plot lines, and then you can just watch that forever. And that may seem great to some people and not to others, right? A lot of people want originality and other things, and a lot of other people are like, you know what, I really like this song. What if it was very similar to this song, but 10% different? That'd be perfect. Or I really like this show. A lot of shows that I like, you're like, this is pretty formulaic, but you keep watching it because it's safe and enjoyable. But this is, I think, a very, very large concern, and while it may seem a bit fantastical, we have to realize that in labs, in simulated environments, AI systems have already demonstrated deception, already demonstrated some power-seeking behaviors. And again, it's what's possible. Is it really the case that all of this is impossible? No. Is AI the current world champion at poker? Yes. That's a game that involves at least some understanding of probabilities and deception. Game diplomacy as well, some sort of strategic thinking. Go, chess, Jeopardy, so on. Like, it's not... It seems like it's most likely that this is, again, going in the direction of more capabilities, more strategic planning, more goal orientation, and more sophistication. And this is why it's a large concern. Control. Can we control these AI systems? Well, how much control do you have over your phone? It's your phone, after all. Surely you have all the control you need. You bought it. You can turn it on. You can turn it off. Well, not quite as much as you may think, right? You, first of all, pretty much need the internet, or at least access to some sort of satellites and everything else and towers. Otherwise, it's not much use to you, right? If you don't have access to all your apps, if you can't message people, it's not a useless rectangle. It's actually one of the most powerful things humanity's ever created. But for you, it's annoying. When you get a service outage, your phone loses a lot of its power. You have to agree to a user agreement, which somewhere buried in there is probably like, if you do the wrong thing, we're just going to brick your phone, meaning the phone company will just shut it down or turn it off. Many people who owned iPhones were displeased when the YouTube album just appeared on their phone in the Apple Store through their product and service. It was put on their phone without their permission, and a lot of people were shocked by this. It kind of revealed the power Apple had all along. People realized they had a lot less control than they thought. When we use apps, we give up many, many permissions. And so there's these series of steps where it seems like we're in control, and we are in some ways. We sign up for these user agreements, we use the apps because they are empowering. Maps is great, and numerous other things people use, but you do have to give something up. And it's to the point where if you don't use a phone, you are disempowered. It's kind of a forced move. So while you do have the control, you have the power to not have a smartphone or something like that, you do yourself a great disservice, at least when you're interacting with a lot of humanity as it currently stands. So you both have control and you don't. And this is just to illustrate that when we think about how much control we have in our lives, you can think for yourself, do you control your job? No. Your health? No. Your friends and your family? No. What do you actually have control over? And what does anyone have control over, for that matter? I think there's two reasons we're probably going to lose control to advanced AI. In short, we're going to give it up, and then it's going to get out of hand. That's the colloquial way of saying it. So we'll willingly give up control for all the benefits. Oh, delicious AI goodies, nom 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 nom, right? These things are too hard to resist. Look how happy this little bot is. He's there to help. Hello, hi, what can I do for you? Everything you want, anything you ever wanted. Why not? A nice companion, a nice assistant to help you plan your meetings, to help you with your emails, to help you make that phone call you don't want to make. This power and functionality will be dramatic. It's already begun, right? There's people who use AI systems every day in their work. If you don't, you might be left behind. That's also where it's going. A lot of us can pretend, this new thing, I don't really have to get on board. I think this is wrong. You'll have to get on board. Otherwise, you'll lose to someone who is. I'm not going to go into detail here, but there's massive economic benefits, military benefits, governmental surveillance benefits. AI assistance is one particular example. I think this is very useful, and this ranges from, again, like a personal assistant to help you plan things, to an AI assistant like a therapist, which you can imagine the advantage there. Will it be as good as the best therapist? Well, maybe not. Let's say it's 80% as good, and it's available 24/7. You don't have to travel. It's always there. And you can say things to it that you may not say to a person. You might be more willing to be open up. And you could also say, like, okay, I don't want to try this type of therapy. Can I try an AI therapist with a completely different background, completely different approach? Sure. Just load a new program. It's really something that's, I think, going to be life-changing for a lot of people. I know there's some people in the world who they just need a bit more reinforcement. So they want the AI system to say, like, you're doing a good job 30 or 40 times a day. And it does it. You're not going to ask a person to do that. It's just something that's not part of our culture at the moment. But you ask an AI, and it's helpful. And this person finds themselves to be more productive. What about number two? An integrated artificial superintelligence is likely uncontrollable. It likely isn't there, but it's still a broad statement. And why this is phrased this way is that once things are integrated, again, they're starting to be now. Microsoft has its Copilot and other things worked into Word and other search features. It's really hard to undo. And you can choose your parallel, whether it's the internet, it's pretty hard to do it over the internet, or more broadly, electricity. Right? We are in this nice room, there's lights, there's electronic devices, there's heating. This is pretty remarkable again, we don't usually think about it, but we exist in Canada at this time in a nice warm room, even though it's really cold. This is amazing. All I have to say is, you can't easily give it up, you can't easily change things. So when AI systems become more and more integrated, again, into your lives and so on, could you really disentangle yourself, like your phone? Can you really do without your phone? If you didn't have your phone, how many of you could easily get home? Some of you could, you know where you live, right? Could you get to your friend's house? Do you know your friend's last name, or their phone number, or their address, or how to get there? A lot of us don't. We have no clue. I mean, you're like, well, if I was near it, I could find my way, but a lot of us would be out of luck. And that just shows how much the world's changed. So when we think about these things, can we turn it off, AI? Can we keep it in a box? Well, can you turn off the internet? You can, but at a huge risk to a lot of things in society. Right now, the internet is heavily integrated into municipal infrastructure, hospitals. Aside from Netflix viewing, which is comparably less important, a lot of our lives are now mediated and navigated through the internet. And without it, we would be much displeased and also disempowered. And when you start to think of things like global financial systems or global economic trade, that's also heavily integrated into electronic internet-based systems. So you could turn it off in theory, but the cost would be very high. Also, turning it off is a bit cavalier because we're thinking about a large distributed system across the Earth. And certainly there are countries that currently exist where they so-called turn off the internet to their own citizens, or they have certain firewalls and block other things. But to actually think about globally shutting down the internet, it's not clear that's even possible. You'd have to have a very coordinated, agreed upon destruction of a lot of things, let's put it that way. And you could then imagine, well, we're all a bunch of humans. Is there a world where there'd be some meeting, some combination of people from different representatives from different countries, they all agree that if something's so bad that we need to shut down the internet, these are the series of steps we would take, these are the criteria we would all agree upon. So is that likely to exist? And then if something does go wrong, what's the likelihood of that actually being followed in a pressure situation? Well, we have the document, turn to page 3, we have 3 minutes to decide if it's meeting the criteria and shut it all down because the risk is too high. Once you also create such a system, a switch, an off switch, that becomes a prime target for terrorists. So there's also that risk to balance. All to say is everything's a little bit more complicated once you start thinking about it. Could we keep AI systems in a box? Well, we could, and they do that when they're training them to see if they are safe and whatnot. But you lose a lot of functionality, right? There's a world where, again, your phone is not connected to the internet. It's still great, but not really for all the things you want to do. You could also have a system where you use your phone for one item, you send one text, and then you turn it off and you turn it back on. Well, that's going to be highly unappealing to most people. And like a lot of these systems, imagine most people say, okay, that's kind of ridiculous, but I'll follow the protocol. But everyone will have to follow the protocol. What's the likelihood everyone is going to be on board with all these safety measures? Can't we just stop it? Well, maybe. Maybe we could. Again, that goes to the point of, well, do you trust everyone else on Earth as much as you might trust yourself? Bribery, blackmail, even just good-natured people accidentally being tricked, taken advantage of. This happens frequently. Social engineering, scams of one type or another. There's also the issue of, again, a good-natured person, their child is very sick. The AI says, well, you know, if you just gave me more resources, I can cure leukemia. I can look at all the millions of scientific papers that have been published each year. Surely, give me a chance to figure it out. That's going to be very, very appealing. Can't we just, right? This is what my limited human brain came up with. I am not a superintelligence, maybe to my 5-year-old self, but not in general. And in that sense, what else might something with superintelligence come up with as a way to circumvent powers or regulations or constraints that we're trying to design? And again, you think to yourself, like, well, how many 5-year-olds can easily outthink an adult? Right? Some analogies in the past have been given where, say you have an adult that's locked up in a cage and it's on an island with 40 children. How long before the adult gets out of the cage? By tricking the children somehow, right? Or however you might want to think about it, it's really just trying to get at, it's really hard to think about how smart or intelligent the superintelligence would be, and could you really think that many steps ahead that you won't be outsmarted? Especially if it kind of discovers, we'll say, new things about the nature of the world, right? We are living in the age of science fiction compared to our ancestors. Again, all the stuff that I said before, the buildings and so on, this is magical, this is wonderful, this was impossible until relatively recently. Wi-Fi didn't exist when I was younger. It does now. It was always possible, though. Again, since the universe began, it's been possible. We just didn't figure it out. Similarly, using Wi-Fi to image a room to get data, surveillance-wise, about where people are and how they move, that's been recently shown to be possible. That was always possible, too. And so once these things happen, people are like, oh, wow, that's a risk. Well, how do you put that into your mind before it's happening? Right? I'm trying to get you to think about the thing that seems impossible or unlikely now happening, but to try to anticipate the risk before it does. All that to say is that things are remarkably different than they used to be, and there's no reason to think that things won't also change a lot in the future, and how best to be prepared for it. Which leads to the risks. So there's a lot of uncertainty in all this. I want to make that abundantly clear. Everything I've said is not with 100% confidence. I think that would be foolish. But this is my best understanding of all these events and why there are potential problems. And so when we think about advanced AI, again, superintelligence, will it exist? How far away is it? There's widespread uncertainty. Something like this has never happened before. It is unprecedented. This means that if you're trying to estimate when something's going to happen, usually you look at what has happened in the past. People do this for weather all the time, but numerous other events. At least you have some sort of historical data to use that's more reliable or rigorous. This is true for climate data. We have a nice centuries or decades old graph, depending on what you look, which shows that temperature has been increasing over time. Similarly, for economic events or other geopolitical events, at least there's something to go on. But with AI, there really isn't. There's no comparator. And this means you can't do probability analysis in a way you normally would. Does that mean you should do nothing? Well, no, because you still have to make decisions despite the uncertainty. So while there is disagreement over when advanced AI systems will arrive, and there's also disagreement how dangerous they'll be, we still have to decide what to do. And it seems like, well, can't we just wait until they get here? Won't that be enough? And the answer, I think, is no. Right now in quotes, over the past several months or even several years, there's been debates in the European Union about their artificial intelligence legislation, and the debate is whether to include statements and articles, we'll say, in reference to generally capable AI systems, like the ones advanced AI might occur. In the world in which we live, it often takes many years to start addressing a problem, and many decades to solve it. if you can solve it at all. And this is where, depending on how you look at the world, you'll be optimistic or pessimistic. We managed to find there was a hole in the ozone and largely fix that problem. It wasn't perfect, but it was quite remarkable. The Montreal Protocol happened in the 90s. We got rid of various chemicals in fridges and other places, and now the hole is largely closed. Why don't we put it that way? It's still a problem we have to keep in mind, but it's largely been fixed. Now, if you think of climate change, though, well, that's been recognized as a problem for quite a long time, and we still have people who think it's not a problem at all. So if you start to think like, well, the AI is not a problem yet, like, well, no, perhaps not quite, but if it takes decades, are you really certain that there won't be a problem with advanced AI within the next couple of decades, within the next 5 or 10 years? I personally think it's entirely plausible we'll have a superintelligence within 10 years. This is well within reason to me. And maybe it's within 20 years. But then it goes to this larger issue. When you're trying to address a problem, do you want to err on one side or the other? You kind of have to. Do you want to be over-prepared or caught off guard? And those are your main choices. It's going to be very hard to time perfectly, especially if you think geopolitically, you need many, many countries and many, many people to all agree that this is a problem and it's worth solving and how to solve it. So in that sense, there's a lot more of this in the book, but while there is widespread disagreement, we have to think about some way of assessing the risk and then deciding what to do about it. Now, one way to see whether it might be an extinction-level threat is to look at the opinions of various other people. This is, again, not data-driven, but it is kind of expert pseudo-consensus-driven. Again, not like climate, but working with what we have. So there's AI researcher surveys. There's recently a new one that just came out by Katja Grace, and I think and Ben Weisbaum, like they did in the previous years. And they survey AI experts, and that usually shows when it might happen. There's widespread disagreement, but usually 10-15% of people think there could be widespread disempowerment of humanity in those surveys. In this particular case, of May 30th of last year, the Center for AI Safety put out the statement, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Well, who signed the statement? Well, so you have some names there at the bottom. Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio are seen as 2 of the 3 godfathers of AI, some of the foremost experts in the field, the most cited in their field. And you also have Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, and these are the co-authors of the most popular textbook that I think is used in 130 countries and 1,500 universities, all about AI. So you have AI safety researchers who are very concerned advanced AI might be an extinction level risk, or at least is worth mitigating as if it was one. And who else do we have? I'll go to the bottom first. You have Martin Rees, the astronomer royal. You have Bill Gates. You have Peter Singer. You have Dan Dennett and David Chalmers. Now, David Dennett and Chalmers don't agree on a lot philosophically, but they both think AI is a risk. I think it's most interesting, though, that we have the CEOs of the main leading 3 AI companies, OpenAI, Sam Altman, Google DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, and Dario Amodei at Anthropic, all signed up to this statement. But this is very odd. In the history of the world, I'm not aware of that many cases where the leading CEOs of a company say our product might cause human extinction. If you have an example, let me know. Yes, people made nuclear weapons and they were worried about that, but think of a commercial product, a pharmaceutical CEO, like, we're working on some pills for everyone, and there's a chance it could kill everyone. Just going to put that out there. And so some people are like, well, that's concerning. That's weird. We should listen to that guy. But other people think, no, they're just saying it. They don't really believe it. Like, well, that's an odd track to take. It's almost always the case it's the other way around, right? When we don't believe companies when they say their product is safe, and now some people don't believe the companies when they say their product is dangerous. So there's a very interesting psychological thing going on here. It's not entirely clear why. Some people think the companies are saying it to gain power through regulatory capture, meaning, look, these things are very dangerous. Only we can be the ones trusted to make them, and so everyone else shouldn't be allowed. I think this isn't that strong. I mean, they do believe that, but I think the argument for regulatory capture doesn't make as much sense. In short, they could have said something less severe to get a similar effect on regulations. And when we're talking about this scale, usually you need billions of dollars anyway to have these models be that powerful. But it is the case, yes, that all 3 of them think it's an extinction level risk. They think that they should build these systems because they know how to do it more safely than anyone else. But of course, the other person also shares that view, and the other person also shares that view. And a lot of these people used to work at the other company and they left because they don't believe they're doing things safely enough. So you have this weird competitive race dynamic, supposedly for safety, but also for power and glory, as everyone wants. But make no mistake, these people are trying to build systems, and it says it on their website, that will replace human work, all human work. That's the goal. And they will be much smarter than humans at everything. That's basically the goal. So if you think, well, maybe this isn't a big deal, like, well, maybe, but then you're betting on them failing. So could they all be wrong? Of course they could. Uncertainty abounds. But are you willing to bet your life on it? That's actually what we're talking about here. It seems a bit fantastical, but it's the case all the time, quite frankly. Right now, we live under the threat of nuclear weapons. We don't think about it, but our current policies regarding nuclear weapons are causing a risk of widespread global Armageddon and the deaths of billions of people. We just don't think about it much. So we're currently betting our lives with nuclear weapons. Should we add another issue, another round in the chamber, so to speak? This is the AI-generated image of Russian roulette, by the way. I thought you might find that amusing in this dark time. Not quite what we intend. And why that's there, Dario Amodei, again, the head of Anthropic, one of these organizations, he recently said he thinks there's a 10 to 25% chance of human extinction. That's worse than Russian roulette. Is he wrong? Maybe, but maybe not. But again, how confident are you, given what you understand about the world and everything, the totality and complexity, and especially what's going to happen, that you're willing to bet your life on these experts, these safety researchers, these general academics, these people who've thought about these things for decades? All of them are wrong. Well, maybe they are, but maybe they're not. What can be done? There's this whole series of problems. Surely, hopefully, we can do something. What can we do for safe AI innovation? We need a moonshot, is what I think. And why the moonshot, I think, is the right analogy, and not the Manhattan Project, which built a bomb. The moonshot was one of the greatest achievements humanity has ever done. When Kennedy said we were going to land a man on the moon before this decade is out, it wasn't clear how they were going to do it. It wasn't a solved problem that just needed to be executed. It was a dream of sorts. If you think about yourself looking up at the moon, as many people did throughout all of human history, how would you get from here to there? Nowadays, you're like, oh, well, you'd fly something, a rocket or something. For most of human history, there was not flight. There were no rockets. It would seem impossible. It would actually seem unthinkable. Thousands and thousands of years ago, people would not have had the conceptual apparatus to understand how you would get to the moon. You can't climb a ladder or go to a tall mountain or build a temple, which they did, but it just doesn't get you there. So why I think it's useful is that because we don't yet know how to make AI safe enough and highly capable, but it doesn't mean we can't. I think we should use principles of verification, agility and adaptability, and defense in depth. The book goes into more detail, but in short, when we're trying to solve anything, we can take a step back and think, what are some larger principles or themes that should guide how we do this? And the verification is there that we can't trust people to mark their own homework, so these companies should be audited, evaluated, whatever it is, with strict verification, and that should be as watertight and have as much teeth as possible. The agility and adaptability is both at a structural level, so as companies, as people, as governments navigate this world, they'll have to move more quickly and change more quickly. Government usually moves relatively slowly, especially when they're putting through regulation, and they might have to just change how they do things. But the other aspect is trying to give you all an emotional heads up. Things have seemed like they've been accelerating lately. There's a lot of change happening. This is very disruptive. There's more to come. And so to try to mentally prepare yourself for change, for perhaps dramatic change, and how you're going to deal with it. Try to, in a way, just sit with the idea of change. And again, some of it will be okay, and some of it may not, but to try to really think through that, because if it happens dramatically and you have to act, you'll need more time to process if you haven't done some pre-processing, so to speak. Defense in depth, I think, is one of the most important principles here, and that is the idea of having multiple layers of defense or multiple angles of attack, so to speak, to make something safe. You don't rely on any one silver bullet to work. You're trying multiple approaches. So it really is whatever seems to work the best, and we're going to figure that out along the way. But it makes sense to try as many things as you can. And so that's where we get 8 proposals. Here are the first 4. Again, this is in more detail in the book. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it's useful to have some sort of liability for AI if this causes harm. People tend to respond to incentives, and if you make them liable, well, we've lost. The system is working. Well, yes, it's available on one of my screens. Oh, look at that. The AI is already trying to disrupt my presentation. So imagine that's just how it goes. Nope, things just get shut down. What's your plan? Liability for harm is a good idea. People respond to incentives, as I was saying. Personal responsibility in some ways. Engineers take oaths. CEOs can be held accountable in different ways. Evaluation of AI systems. This should also have a lot of teeth. You'd have to have experts doing it. They'd have to be highly capable and have a lot of access. The regulation of computer power is one of the most useful choke points, so to speak. If you recall earlier, I said one of the three main reasons that AI systems are so powerful: algorithms, computer power, and data. It's easiest to focus on who has access to the computer power. It's not easy, but it is easiest of the three, because we still want mobility of labor and people can go to workplaces, and we also know that data is ubiquitous, especially with synthetic data becoming more available. All I have to say is that at the moment, in this brief moment in time, these computer chips aren't made in that many places. They're not designed in many places, and they're not made in many places. This is rapidly changing, but it's one of the reasons that we could gain better insight into who has the power to make these systems. Usually you need thousands of these chips, and you could have an exactly detailed understanding of who makes the chips. You could have, we'll say, little processes or features of the chip that make them usable in one way or not another, and maybe even exploring things like remote destruction of chips. Again, everything should be on the table here. Requiring enhanced security, cyber, physical, and personal. This is just normal good business practice that people often underestimate. These AI systems, which people spend a lot of money creating, aren't actually that complicated once you have created them, meaning they don't take up a lot of space. You can put them on a USB stick, so to speak. So how are companies protecting their secrets? And a lot of them, I think, are vulnerable. So that seems like an easy win. AI safety research is a good idea. How are we making these things safe? Right now, there's a vast difference in how many people are working to make these things highly capable compared to how many people are trying to make them safe. Maybe it's 300 to 1, maybe it's 100 to 1, maybe it's 1,000 to 1. All I have to say is investing in AI safety research is a good idea. Dedicated national, international governance agencies. I think it helps for responsibility of who's accountable and who isn't, how organizations and structures function in government and other places. Usually if there's a clear mandate and an organization has that mandate, and hopefully they're empowered, then greater things can happen. Requiring a license. Who gets to make these things? Why not have licensing as well? We have licensing for all sorts of other complicated, perhaps dangerous things. Not everyone can just make these sort of things. So I think that's a good idea. And finally, that says require labeling of AI content. I think as a user, you should know every time you're seeing AI content, or at least have the option to know. Maybe you don't want a notification every second if you're looking at AI-generated art, but at least you should have the option to know when you're looking at AI stuff. This seems possible given the technology and given people's willingness. Now, again, people just put stuff on the internet, who knows what, but responsible agencies and organizations can make it a stipulation of using their products and services. So I think these are the 8 main proposals. What can you do? Well, it seems sometimes trite, but you can make a difference. People forget this. It really is the case that you can make a difference. You can increase AI safety through advocacy, talking to your political representatives, work, donating money, joining others, having student associations like Carleton. But people, it's a quirk of human nature, and I'm subject to it as well. Right? Sometimes it's easier to listen to a 1-hour podcast than to spend 5 minutes writing to your political representative saying, how are you going to make sure I'm safe from AI? But one of those is more effective than the other, usually. This is my podcast. Feelings of futility are understandable. I just gave you a long list of problems. But it's not useful to make change. And I think when it's pointed out, everyone kind of understands this, right? Oh, I can't do everything. True. Therefore, I won't do anything. That's a weird conclusion. Doesn't work for everything else in life. Oh, I can't be in perfect shape, so I won't even try. No. I can't be the best student, so I won't be a decent student. No, it just doesn't make sense. So we have to remind ourselves that, okay, even if this is a large problem, it makes sense to try to solve it, to try to tackle it, because we don't know. Again, just because it's currently unsolved does not mean it's unsolvable. So if we're trying to look for hope, and sometimes it can be dire, even I hear some of this stuff, and when Stuart Russell casually said that Geoffrey Hinton is like, well, he thinks there's a couple years left. He's putting his affairs in order. Well, that's disturbing. Is it true? Well, again, he doesn't know, but it is plausible in the broad range of possible scenarios. And so what do you do with that? Well, you can find hope in trying to find solutions, trying to find answers. I don't think you can rationalize yourself into hope, but I think you can rationalize yourself away from hopelessness. but it does take thinking. You have to train yourself to think, okay, there are good reasons to keep trying. There are good reasons to work on AI safety. There are good reasons to try to solve unsolvable problems. And humanity has done it before. We went to the moon. Thank you. We'll take some questions, but very quickly, the book is available on Amazon, Audible, and just recently on Apple. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever. I'm also an advisor to AIGS.ca, Canada's sort of AI governance organization.